Hello all, in this session we are going to learn constraints in database management system. Namely, we have primary key constraint and referential integrity constraints. Let us see what is primary key constraint. A primary key constraint is in a table that uniquely identifies each row and column or set of columns in a table. Now, what do you mean by this? Primary key in a table is going to ensure that every record of an individual can be identified uniquely or distinctly. Now, let me take an example. Assume that we have an employee relation with IDs like employee ID, name of the employee, in which department the employee is working, and what is the position of the employee in that particular department. In this case, we know that the IDs for the employee will be unique. So let me write the values for employee ID. And the name of the employees may or may not be same. So here let the name of the employees be considered as X, Y, and Z. And there is some data under department and position columns. Now in this case, employee ID can be considered as a primary key. It is because the IDs for employee may not be same when compared with the other employee. Whereas coming to the name attribute, there may exist two or more employees with the same name. And hence, employee name cannot be a primary key attribute. Similarly, department and position cannot be a primary key attribute because there may exist employees who belongs to the same department and may also have same position in the department. So thereby, in this case, ID is a primary key attribute. So namely, the primary key attribute is used for identifying the record uniquely from n number of records that are present in an employee relation. And it is represented using an underline symbol. Any attribute, if it is underlined, it means that it is a key attribute or it is a primary key attribute. Rules for defining a primary key attribute. There are certain rules to be followed when you define a primary key. Namely, we have minimal. The primary key is composed of minimum number of attributes that satisfy the unique occurrence of the tuples or records. There may exist two or more attributes which may have unique values, but then we will be considering either of the one attribute to be as a primary key. If there exists a set of attributes which are able to uniquely identify a record from the relation, then those set of attributes are termed as a candidate key. Example, assume that I have SID and roll number of a student relation. Student ID and roll number. In this example, we consider the values for student ID is differing with the values of the roll number column. So let the values for student ID be 1, 2, and 3, and the roll numbers are 101, 102, and 103. Now, in this case, both are able to identify the record of a student uniquely. So when these set of attributes are able to uniquely distinct the record of a student in a student relation, then this can be considered as a candidate key. But then we will be using either of one attribute to be as a primary key. So if SID, that is the student ID, is considered as a primary key, then the rest ID will be defined as a candidate key. Only single attribute will be termed as a primary key because it becomes easy to access the record as well as it becomes easy to design the database. And hence, the primary key is composed of only with the minimum number of attributes. And next, coming to accessible, which is one of the rules to be followed when we define a primary key. The primary key is used to check the ability to access and interact with the database. If it is a single attributed primary key, then it becomes easy to retrieve or to make any sort of operations when the user is able to access the data from the database, because it has fewer set of columns and there exists very few relationship among the tables. So thereby it becomes easy in accessing the data from the database. And coming to the next rule, that is non-null value. The primary key refers to a non-null value that is required for the identification of the tuple. Remember that whenever the values you give for the primary key attribute, those values cannot be a null value and the values cannot be duplicated. So this is most important when an attribute is identified as a primary key attribute. If ID is an attribute, say it is a key attribute, then the values that the user try to enter for this attribute must not be a null value. And the values cannot be duplicated. Say if 1 is the ID which has been already entered, then For the next time when you are trying to record or insert a new tuple in the same relation, then the value for the ID cannot be the same one. It cannot be duplicated. The values must be unique and it must not contain any null values. These are the two primary things which are to be noted when we define a primary key to a particular attribute. And next, coming to time invariant. The values of the primary key must not change or become null during the lifetime of the relation. So this is something which is going to tell you that when compared to ID, we have to give more preference or priority to this ID attribute to be a primary key. It is because as the time passes, time invariant means as the time passes or later on, there may exist an employee with the same name which is already recorded or stored in the relation. Thereby, we are able to identify only the record of an employee if ID is set to a primary key, but not name which is identified as a primary key. The syntax for creating and deleting the primary key. There are two ways in which you can create the primary key. One is the case when you are going to create a table or a relation. During the creation itself, we can define the primary key for an attribute. If the table is already created and then if the attribute is not identified with the primary key, later on, you can add the primary key to that particular attribute by using alter as a command. So these are the two syntaxes which we have in defining a primary key. And one more, if I would like to delete the primary key, then we will be using alter as a command with the combination of drop. Let me take an example and explain you in better way during the execution of primary key part. Now we will be seeing referential integrity constraint. So referential integrity constraint is also known as foreign key constraint. When we are talking about referential integrity constraint, we need to remember that there exist two different tables and there is a relationship among these two tables. And the relationship is identified if there exists a common attribute that is present in both the relations. If there is attribute called ID in this relation and the same attribute if it is also present in the second table, then we will come to know that there is a relationship between these two. Mainly, this referential integrity constraint is used to maintain the consistency between the tuples of n number of relations. And the table, the first table from which the values are derived in the second table, this attribute will be termed as a foreign key. And this will be termed as a primary key. The values which are derived from the primary key of the first table is known as a foreign key. And the table, this table, the foreign key table is also known as the child table. Whereas this primary key table is also known as the parent table or it is known as master table. Now we will see certain constraints which comes under referential integrity constraint. Namely, we have two different constraints, that is insertion constraint and deletion constraint. What is insertion constraint? Value cannot be inserted in the child table if the value is not lying in the master table. Similarly, value cannot be deleted from the master table if the value is lying in the child table. Now let me take an example. This SID in toppers table is known as foreign key. And this SID, that is student ID in student table, is known as primary key. The values of SID are derived from the values of this SID of the primary key. Now, let us see about the insertion constraint and deletion constraint of referential integrity constraint. Now, what is an insertion constraint? It is said that if you are trying to insert a new record in the child table, let us say I would like to insert a new record whose SID is equal to 5. Now this record cannot be inserted into the child table because the value 5 for SID is not present in the parent table. This is our main table. This is the main table where in which it contains the details of all the students. Totally, we have only 4 number of students and whose student ID is 1, 2, 3, and 4. There is no student with ID 5. So thereby, if you are trying to insert a new record in the toppers table, it shows an error saying that referential integrity constraint has been violated in inserting a new record in the child table. If there exists the same record in the toppers table, and if you're trying to remove the record in the parents table, then it shows you with an error. If suppose I would like to delete the record of Harry from the parent table, but the same record as it is present in the child table, the changes you make here has to reflect here also. If not, then what happens? It leads to inconsistency. So as the record is present in the other table, that is the child table, it is not possible to delete the record from the parent table. And then if I would like to delete the record in the child table, they does not create any problem, because these are the values which are derived from the master table. So even if the record is deleted from the child table, its basic details of that particular student will be available in the parent table. Now we have another terms called on delete cascade, and one more is on delete set null. Now what are they? Without violating the referential integrity constraints, when you are trying to delete a record in the parent table, though the record is available in the toppers table, it can be made only with the help of on delete cascade when you are creating a foreign key table. During the creation of foreign key table itself, it is necessary to specify on delete cascade. Thereby what happens? If a record is deleted from the parent table, and if the record is present in the toppers table or in the child table, the particular record will be deleted automatically. And one more is on delete set null, which means if the record is deleted in the parent table and the same record, if it is existing in the child table, then the values for the particular attributes in the child table are set to null automatically once the record is deleted in the master table. So this is about on delete cascade and on delete set null. On delete cascade and on delete set null. So on delete cascade is used to specify when a row is deleted from the parent table, all the rows in the child table that reference the deleted row should also be deleted. So it will get deleted when this particular constraint is specified during the creation of the child table. Similarly, on delete set null is whenever a record from the parent table is deleted, and if the same record is present in the child table, then the values for the attributes in the child table are set to null automatically. This is about the on delete set null. Now we will be seeing the execution part of the primary key constraints as well as the referential integrity constraints. Now I'm going to create a primary key using create command. So create table employee ID is an attribute associated to employee and whose type is defined as int. Let ID be a primary key. So I'm specifying a primary key. So when you are using this primary key for ID, ensure that there is a space between primary and key, comma, there is another attribute, say name is another attribute. As name is a string, you also have to specify the size for it. Semicolon, click on enter button. Now query okay, which means primary key for ID has been created. The creation of the table is done normally, and then using an alter command, we have added primary key constraint for this ID attribute. So these are the two ways in which you can create a primary key for an attribute. Now I would like to delete the primary key. For deleting primary key, we are using a drop command. So alter table name, drop constraint name. What is our constraint name? Primary key is our constraint name for the referential integrity constraint. So before that, as referential integrity constraint relates to tables, the first table must definitely contain a primary key attribute. So again, I am making changes to this by adding constraint as a primary key to ID column for employee one relation. And now I'm taking another table, create department, create table department, which is my second table, or it is a child table. Create table name with some ID is a foreign key for department table, and the values of this foreign key are derived from the primary key table. So where is my primary key table? So this is my primary key table. So for ID, the values are derived from this column. So thereby I'm going to write the references, the value for this column name. We are going to refer from the which table? Employee table. So here references employee of which column? ID column, comma. Now the other attributes which you can give to the department. Let the attribute be department name, varchar. So select start from employee one. So these are the records which we have inserted for the master table, and let us check for the department table. So these are the records which we have inserted for the department table. Hope you have understood today's lecture. Thank you.